Thank you very much. My name's Michelle and I'm with the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, as Liz said, and I'm also with the Global Alliance, but I'd very much like to acknowledge the diverse peoples and lands upon which we're meeting today, and I want to acknowledge that I am from a settler community in Australia and that I work with my Indigenous colleagues in Australia, the Aboriginal people, one of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth. And I bring greetings from my very best friends, the Gungaloo folk in the middle of Queensland. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening in Australia, just to share with you, I guess as an act of solidarity, that even the richest countries on Earth are dealing with communities who are really disempowered, and that we're dealing with corporate forces that we don't know what to do with, and we're very frightened. In Australia right now we have communities who are very frightened because we're losing a lot of things that are important to us, like water, our communities, our civil rights, and I'll talk a bit in a moment about what's happened in our governments. So I guess I just want to pay my respects to all of you, and I've also been asked to share not only stories from Australia, but I'll talk very briefly at the end about some developments in New Zealand. I don't pretend to be an expert on the Wanganui, or it's pronounced the Whanganui River, which was given, or not given, it's in a process of having legal personhood granted to it, and I'll talk about that at the end. And if there's lots of questions about that, I can take a few and maybe not take a few as well. So I guess I wanted to start first because being a girl from Australia, I normally have the backup support of PowerPoint presentation, and I normally have a lot of wonderful pictures from the Great Barrier Reef and my country. And for people who might not be familiar with Australia, I just want to take a minute to describe it to you. So if you're tired, feel free to close your eyes. No, I just wanted to explain how big it is and how few people actually live there, and how rich we are, and how we're managing to destroy so much of it so quickly, and how sad we are about that. So if you don't know where we are, we're down the bottom. The next piece of real estate south of us is the Antarctic. The folks over to our left is New Zealand. So we're down in the southern hemisphere. The landmass of Australia is a continent. It's so big, it's almost as big as the USA. And the Americans, the US folk can tell me, in America I think they have 250 million people. In the US, 300. I am out of touch. In Australia we have 22 million people in a big country. We were settled 200 years ago by the English, and in a constitutional space we have a federal government, and under that we have 6 state governments and a couple of territories. Some of our territories are little islands and special places around the coast. Australia is massive, and all the way around are beautiful sandy beaches. 90% of Australians live around the coastal edge. I grew up in the desert, so I can speak for those of us who chose not to live on the coast. We lived in the bush, the outback. So Australia has a big, beautiful country, a lot of diversity for its a lot of deserts in the middle, but the deserts in there are beautiful and there's lots of plants and animals. It's not just sand. The north of Australia is Queensland on one part of it, the Northern Territory, and I'm going to talk a lot in a moment about Queensland because it is a very special place and it is under almost the most direct threat from coal, coal seam gas, and a few other fun things. I guess the other thing to know about Australia is a phenomenal diversity. If anyone knows of koala bears and wombats and kangaroos and emus, I had all these cute pictures to show you and creatures you mightn't have heard of, like the numbat and some other really fun things. They're always furry. And I love the comedian Billy Connolly calls our animals pocket mammals because we have all those marsupials with pouches and they bounce and climb and crawl with Bubba in their tummy. So we have a pretty amazing place, and everybody has an amazing place. But what I'm deeply ashamed about is that we are one of the richest countries on Earth, and the greed, the mining, this extraction insanity is just so out of control. So I want to just leave you with the idea that we were conquered by English 200 years ago. We have devastated many species. We have the highest extinction rate of mammals in the world because we have such delicate, fragile creatures and plants. They live in like a small rocky area might have 5 species of lizard that don't exist anywhere else. So when something affects that small place, we lose those animals. So taking now a step away from how beautiful our country is, oh, and I forgot to mention the Great Barrier Reef. I'll be talking on Friday, I hope, at the Tribunal about the atrocities that are about to be inflicted on our Great Barrier Reef. If you don't know what that is, it is the biggest coral reef system in the world. It's 2,500 kilometres long, all the way down from the top of Queensland down to the southern parts of my home state. It's the only natural system on Earth that you can see from outer space. It's home to more than 5,000 species of creature, and I can break that down for you if you want to hear about it, but I shouldn't go on for too long. But when I talk to you in a moment about the invasion of coal and other things, you'll see what's at risk and what's at stake. And again, I'm just sharing this so that you can see you're not alone in the battles that are ahead of you, or that you're already facing, where all of us, I think, are in this mess together. So in just one state, in my state of Queensland, we have 30 coal mines, either operative or planned. We have the biggest mega coal mines planned in the centre of our state, called the Galilee Basin. If anyone's active in the climate change activism around the world, you will know of the Galilee Basin. People like Bill McKibben and 350.org have a big campaign to say, keep the coal in the ground. For an example, one mine alone is proposed to have a 60 megaton capacity per year for 150 years. Your average coal mine is 5 to 10 million a year. This is 60 million tonnes, one coal mine in Queensland. We have 2, maybe 3, I'm out of touch, mines that have been approved that are 30 megatons a year for 50 years or more. All of this is coming out of one small geographical place, which I call home, central western Queensland. This coal, the pressure of this coal is forcing expansion of coal ports along the coast right next to the Great Barrier Reef, the biggest coal reef system in the world. A year and a half ago, UNESCO gave an official warning to the Australian government that for the first time since it was listed in 1981, the Great Barrier Reef is heading towards being listed as a World Heritage Property in danger. They made 14 recommendations, including no more coal ports, no increase in shipping, clean up Gladstone. It's the 4th biggest coal port in the world. And they've done dredging in there, and they've been killing fish and turtles and dolphins. Fisher folk have come out with arms out of water covered in rashes. This is in Australia, you know. So, the Great Barrier Reef's under pressure. We have at least 30,000 coal seam gas wells planned for half of the state. We don't know about the rest. If you pull up maps of Australia and look at coal, oil, coal seam gas exploration permits, the entire country goes from a blank slate to black. And I know that Mari and Thomas, when they came to Australia, have seen that map, and it's very overwhelming for an Australian. And remember, in our country, coal seam gas is only about 10 or 12 years old, and it's only taken root in Queensland, and everywhere else it's starting to happen. So we're at the beginning of this disease. The other thing that's happening, like many countries around the world, in the last year, we've had one state government come in that is extremely what some folk might call right-wing. They have eliminated as much environmental law as possible. They're removing as many civil rights in other pieces of legislation as possible. They immediately cut funding to an Environmental Law Defender's Office, the only office in Queensland that protects environmental law. 3 months ago, the new national government came in, and they made sweeping changes. They're trying to abolish the carbon tax. First time since 1931, Australia doesn't have a Minister for Science. First time in 25 years, no one from Australia went to the climate change negotiations. So between the federal and the movement across to sort of a really extreme view of what they think is conservatism, Australia is deeply under threat. And worse still, it's not just us we're messing up. All that coal that gets dug up is going somewhere else. And I think the estimate was, if all of the coal in the Galilee Basin does get mined out, that's 30% of the global budget, carbon budget, that's going to get us to a 2% rise. So if we can even just keep the Galilee Basin in the ground, we're going to make a big difference to the world. So this is the earth that I'm facing in Australia. We also have a lot of fun things like the regression of protection of forests. We're seeing logging and hunting in national parks. We're seeing a whole bunch of things that we're all just... The activists I work with are exhausted. There is almost not enough of us to cover the ground that has to be faced. And this is where the rights of nature comes in as a framework for AILA. The Australian Earth Laws Alliance was formed by a bunch of mates. It's the Aussie word for friend. A whole bunch of us got together in 2009 at a conference, and that's where I first met Liz Rivers and I heard about Cormac's book. And a few of us fell in love with both the idea of earth laws and in this Western framework, this idea of rights of nature. And I know that there are critiques here and there, but in a Western framework where our environmental laws aren't working, it offers an interesting space for us. So AILA was born in about 2011, this Earth Law Alliance, and there's a whole bunch of us that just volunteer together, very passionate about what we do. And we do a mix of academic research, activism, bringing people together, building networks into Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. And I'll finish my little spiel on Australia by just saying this other piece of work that we're very interested in is the community-based organising framework that SALDEF have been doing around rights of nature. So both community and rights of nature coming together. And the reason we're interested in is to go back to our federal structure. Most of the power over resource management, and that's what they call it, not me, over our precious earth is in the hands of state governments. And at the moment our state government is a phenomenon out of control. The federal government traditionally has had some control over reducing that power, but this new government just handed it all back to the states. So we sit in local communities watching our forests get cut down and watching our coal seam gas, and that we're like many countries. If you're a farmer or someone with a bit of land and somebody wants to explore or drop a well for coal seam gas, you cannot stop them. Under English common law, the Crown owns everything under the earth. This is a huge issue in Australia. Nobody can stop them. We've got one of the biggest civil rights movements Australia's ever seen called Lock the Gate, and we're involved with them. And these are citizens who have never been activists actually saying, we've got this wonderful, I should have brought some, we've got this wonderful yellow triangle, lock the gate. And if you're interested in some of these movements, they've gone to America, they've gone to other places, the US, I'm sorry. So we've got a huge number of NGOs fighting all this at the moment, and AILA is not anything special, we're small, but we are the only group that's starting to work within the rights of nature framework. And we're trying to share that with folks, and we do that through education. And we now have, particularly after Thomas and Mari's visit, we have 3 communities who are at the point where they have run out. There's nothing left. The law can't help, they've taken cases, the forests are getting cut down, the bays are getting polluted, and some of these folk, we've got a very ancient land, we've got very ancient groundwater. We're already seeing with our very young coal seam gas industry, groundwater disappearing in 5 and 8 years. And this is ancient. No one knows how old it is. No one knows how long it takes to replenish. So our situation is dire. We're finding communities that have just run out of options. And in Australia, we have a very conservative people. The English strain of compliance with the law is very strong. And everyone's now saying we've all got to stop being so polite and kind and nice. We've got to stand up. We've got to fight it. And the biggest problem in Australia is complacency amongst, I would say, 60%, radical desperation amongst the 25-30% of activists, and then, the usual plutocracy elite who are controlling it all. So we are hoping to use a rights of nature framework. We're going to work with communities to see what suits them, what fits with them, to try to work towards some kind of local level lawmaking, or at least start these conversations, and it might take us a couple of years. We will also continue to work with some of the other NGOs. The only good thing about the threats to the reef is for the very first time, about 8 of the biggest NGOs in Australia are banding together and working on stuff. So that's kind of the picture from Australia. The optimistic, shiny, bright side I'd like to leave it on is that it's still a great place to come visit. If any of you ever come visit me in Brisbane. And there is quite a wonderful feeling of solidarity as the forces of darkness sort of close in around us. We all joke that our job now is to be even shinier and brighter and to work harder. So that's what we're doing. And I'll just take 1 minute. I'm sorry, I've probably warbled on for too long. I just want to talk about New Zealand. So, and if anyone's got questions about either, I'm happy to chat endlessly for days. So, oh, cool, excellent. So that's Australia. Big mess, but gorgeous place. Lots of good people. Anyway. Over the Tasman is a very different place called New Zealand, and geographically speaking it's almost the opposite of Australia. It's very small, very mountainous and very green, and it's very lovely. And if Catherine Iwans was here, she would tell you about, they've got a brand new New Zealand Earth Laws Alliance New Zealand. It's so brand new they don't even have a website, but they are having their first conference in mid-February. And is Linda Sheehan here? Yep, we're both going. It's going to be great. So, so what they're doing at the moment is it's really starting with a bunch of environmental lawyers who are concerned about environmental law the same as the rest of us. So they've got a small gathering of folk, and it's going to be really interesting to see what they do with that. But I think the thing that a lot of people are interested in is the development of the legal personhood status. It's spelt WHANG, A-N-U-I. So it looks like Wanganui. Did you like that bit of Australiana? Did you like that one? This lady over here the other day said that I should just keep talking because it's funny. She thought my accent is scary, but anyway. This river is actually pronounced the Whanganui River. And I just want to explain to you that it actually has come from a very different place to some of the rights of nature discussions we've had today. So whereas I guess the work that Thomas Amari and others are doing about looking at pushing through in our conservative kind of Western democratic legal systems these old ideas and making them modern, what's interesting about the Whanganui River is that at the end of 2012 there was this big international press saying that this river had rights. And it's sort of like that, but it's not. So what happened in New Zealand is that when the English conquered that country, they had a treaty, the Treaty of Waitangi. And under that treaty, a lot of the Maori, the traditional people, the iwi, the Maori people were actually recognised as traditional owners, and they were able to sign up agreements and, you know, compensation agreements and such. So for those folks who lost land or lost privileges, compensation discussions would happen about what the state would give them and what they would get in exchange. The Whanganui River and its legal personhood arrangements have actually arisen under the Treaty of Waitangi compensation settlement discussions. It's actually the longest running case under the Treaty of Waitangi. It's been running since about the 1870s, so this is coming from a very different place. In a nutshell, what they're trying to do is use the Western legal system to recognise a little bit of custodial responsibility for this beautiful river. At the moment, what happens is it goes through several stages. They develop up an ROU or an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, that says this river will be managed in this way. At the moment, it looks like they want to create it to have legal personhood. Now, that's different to rights of nature. It's actually being recognised as having the similar right to a human being or a corporation. It's not the kinds of things that Thomas Berry and Indigenous cultures talk about, which is it has its own inherent right to be and to thrive and to evolve. But from the Western point of view, it's still a radical thing, and that's why it made international press, because here they were, in a very sensible country, giving river rights. So where it's up to is a structure for that agreement has been put together, and what it would look like is the river would have two guardians, one Maori person and someone from the government, and they would be guardians. It's not a full property right over the river. They couldn't stop existing folk from doing anything to it. But what it does mean is that they should have greater access to making decisions or recommendations. At the moment, even that point of agreement hasn't even gone through. It hasn't been sort of legally finalised, so it's in the process. But last year we were very lucky. We brought a young man, a wonderful barrister over from New Zealand, and he was telling us all about the detail of these arrangements. And there's a couple more on the bubble, including one for an entire forest ecosystem in New Zealand. And he was kind of cheeky because he said, on the one hand, the Maori people didn't get everything they wanted, but they got a little bit of something more than they had. And the colonial powers, the New Zealand government, didn't really click about what this might mean. Because when people were asking them, how do you implement it? How would this be enforced? What would this look like? He said, nobody knows. The whole thing is up for grabs. So what's really interesting to me as an Australian is seeing how traditional, cultural, custodial rights and obligations over country are being reflected in a Western space. In Australia, it's very different because our Indigenous people were never recognised. There was no treaty. There is no treaty. So we've got a very different legal system. But I have some friends, the Gungaloo people, who are very interested in some of these ideas and seeing what that looks like. So to bring the New Zealand example back to Australia, we're very keen to look at all the developments around the world and see what ideas we can bring into a very rich country that should be ashamed of itself, that should be doing better, and to see if we can bring some of these ideas in with enough hard work. So thank you for your time.